We are going to have disruptions. That just happens. We had it with the waterfront. We had it with Climate Pledge. We had it with the Cracking Community Iceplex. You're going to have that. But what you say, it's the kind of common sense of you get a nickel to get a quarter. And we hope better benefits come from that.
Well, that's Council President Deborah Juarez, also a member of the Sound Transit Board, talking about the resolution the council is approving this week with the city's preferred alternatives for the Sound Transit Light Rail project. What is next in that long process? Will the city council vote to overturn the first veto of Mayor Bruce Harrell's administration? And also, how will that new ruling from the Supreme Court about the EPA really affect how we're handling environmental concerns in our state? Well, we are tackling those topics and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are my own. And I'm joined by none other than David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, thank you for joining me as always. I noticed an interesting photo you tweeted out last week about gas prices regionally, which, newsflash everybody, are terrible. Two-part question here, David. So part one, does part of your job as a transportation reporter include finding the best gas prices in our region? That's part one. Part two, are you earning extra credit by using your bicycle to take those photos? What do you got?
Yeah, I know. I should be. I don't get to expense miles on my bicycle.
Right. You should, man. But you found something that was below $5 that looked magical.
Yeah. It's on the Squamish Indian Reservation, and their prices are always quite a bit cheaper than the rest. But even they had gotten up to almost $5.30 at one point. So the fact that they were down to $4.80 was notable, I thought.
Now we go. That's a little bit of a ways for me to go to look for gas, but I thank you for the tip anyway. That's good to know. David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks also to our listeners. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're at City Hall. Please do support them. Other small businesses too. Thanks also to our patrons. Could always use more support for the show, folks, please, and thank you. At whatever amount works for you, we do send a coffee mug to our $10 a month supporters, but whatever you can spare, highly appreciated. We love our patrons because they sent in photos for our mug shot of the week. I'm going to put up a flashback shot of my good friend John Yeager. He actually supports the podcast, sent in this photo. He also works for Northwest Blood Works, and I know he would tell you our blood supply is at its lowest level in more than a decade. If you can donate to this podcast on Patreon, that's awesome. But if you can donate to our blood supply, that's even better. So shout out to you, John, and keep up the good work. Finally, thanks to Converge Media. The video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go with right here, right now. All right, well, David, the vote happening basically as we speak, Tuesday morning this week, for the council to approve the recommendations for the alignment of light rail as it goes through West Seattle and Ballard. This is the committee level. They would send it on to the council at this point, the full council. Just looking at this, and I know we've touched on this before, what are the highlights of this city recommendation as you see it? And secondly, what impact does this recommendation from the city really have on the final product?
Yeah, I think the thing that kind of stands out the most to me is, there were some questions around where the light rail would go through kind of South Lake Union, Lower Queen Anne / Uptown, whatever you want to call it. And there had been some concerns raised by folks in Seattle Center, so KEXP and the Vera Project and some of the theaters, that having this light rail kind of come under them would be disruptive, and that they even threatened that they would have to move. Originally, there were two proposals for different lines, one that kind of went one direction, one that went the other, and the city's recommendation has sort of combined those two. They're recommending that it takes kind of a diagonal route, so it avoids most of those vendors in Seattle Center. So that's kind of the most substantive recommendation, I think. And then also really notable is that the city is not taking a position, at least right now, on the Chinatown International District.
CID,
That really arguably, I think that's kind of the most contentious, perhaps, decision that Sound Transit has to make, because there's a lot of, as we talked about, there's a lot of complicating factors and a lot of history there in the neighborhood around development. So the Sound Transit Board is going to have to figure that out. And it's interesting that Seattle has not staked a firm position on this one, which I think just kind of to show how sticky this situation is.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to take be holding the bag on this one for the final decision on it. And that's the tough part for me, because looking at the CID, of course, it's an important area. And of course, you're going to hear from a lot of people there who are saying there's not been enough outreach to the community here to really hear what this community has to say. Chinatown's been around for a long time. It's been impacted by a lot of different transportation projects, notably I-5 several decades ago that really split Chinatown and Little Saigon in half. But in looking at that, I'm just trying to figure out what the next piece is. If the city of Seattle can't put forward a recommendation on that, what Sound Transit, that whole board, what are they supposed to do? How do they get informed about that, and where do they put a stop?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are city representatives on the board. The mayor is on the board, and Council President Juarez too. Yeah, is on the board. So that Seattle's voice will still be involved here, but it does feel like a little bit punting on this question, leaving it to other elected officials to tackle it. Because the challenge is, in some ways, the kind of more straightforward, like if you were just looking at this in a vacuum around kind of transit, from a transit perspective, there's kind of one clear option. But if you're looking at it as how this impacts the community, there's a separate clear option, and kind of bringing those two things together is proving to be really challenging. How do you do what in some ways on paper maybe looks like the preferred option for building this transit line, but how do you balance that with the very serious and real disruptions that would cause to a community that has been through a lot lately?
Been through a ton. And it's interesting, David, so in talking with Council President Juarez last week on the Council Edition show that I do for Seattle Channel, she told me there's been some talk at the Sound Transit Board level to potentially delay this final vote that's supposed to happen at the end of this month on July 28th. And I know they're talking about these different preferred alternatives, and there's a lot of back and forth, especially with what the city of Seattle is saying here. I'm just trying to figure out what those negotiations are like inside the Sound Transit Board right now, because you've got these Seattle-based lawmakers wringing their hands over different pieces of this, but then you got some people in Pierce County and Snohomish County saying, hey, we got to get this project moving. I mean, this is a regional board, and I think that's something that a lot of people might not think of when you look at what Seattle's doing here. But there's a lot of other pieces here, too, that need to connect. And there are lawmakers in these other areas that are doing their best to rally for their interests, too.
Yeah, exactly. I think at the end of the day, it just goes to show how challenging and complicated it is to build a mass transit system into a city that is already pretty built out.
Yeah, right.
Past... In an ideal world, this would have happened sort of concurrently with the city's development. But
Atlanta stole our system. I know we always hear that
exactly.
one. Yeah.
So you build out the mass transit system as the city itself is growing, but the city, as we well know, has already grown quite a bit. And you're trying to kind of put one map on top of the other. It is inevitable that you have conflicts at almost every point. I mean, it's Chinatown International District, Queen Anne Uptown, debate around what happens in Ballard, certainly in West Seattle.
Oh, I've heard it out here in West Seattle for sure, yeah.
This is just the reality of what happens when you are putting in big city mass transit system in a city that's already big.
Yeah. Wow. So much to consider here. Thank you for the background on that, David. And I know we're going to hear more from the City Council and actually the full board of Sound Transit later on this month. So I want to move on to another piece here, because in other news this week, the council is reconsidering Mayor Harrell's first and only veto of his administration so far. This is a veto of some council legislation from a few weeks ago regarding landlords needing to turn over more data about how and where they set their rent prices. David, I know we touched on this when the veto came down in June. The council just barely passed this measure through with a 5-4 vote. Is there enough energy on this council? I'm going to ask this again. Is there enough energy to push back even further and find that 6th vote they would need to actually overturn the veto? This has been an interesting back and forth I've seen over the past couple weeks at City Hall.
Yeah, I don't have my ear to the ground on this, so I don't know if there's enough energy on that. Again, as we've talked about before, this kind of goes to show the dynamics have changed on the City Council, at least. At least before it was the City Council could kind of override any veto they wanted, and it's no longer the case. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there's the energy to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch this, because it was such a interesting union of council members who put this together. You had Councilmember Peterson and you had Councilmember Morales as co-sponsors for this. And Councilmember Peterson has had his questions about MHA, mandatory housing affordability, in the past. And then on the other side, you've got people like Councilmember Morales, who is definitely all about it with MHA and in the different neighborhoods here. I guess I was surprised, and I don't know what your take on this was. Were you surprised that Peterson couldn't get Council President Juarez and Councilmember Nelson to join him in supporting this? Because they've been allies of his in the past on different legislation.
Yeah, they've been allies in the past, but Councilmember Peterson is unique in one respect, which is, I would say, towards development and housing construction. He is I would say he is, among all the city council people, the most skeptical of added density and changes to single family zoning. And there was some indication that his desire to get this data is rooted in kind of his, as a way to bolster his argument that maybe Seattle has capacity already to absorb growth in a way that a lot of other folks disagree with. And so I think especially, Councilmember Nelson hasn't been around as long, and so we don't have quite a track record.
Not as long as a council member, for sure. But yeah, keep going.
Right, as a council
she's
member.
Been an aide at City Hall for a long time. Yeah,
right. But she has not had the opportunity to take that many votes on density, is what I'm saying.
There you go. Okay.
Whereas, Councilmember Juarez, for example, though, has. I mean, she voted on all the MHA
that's right.
Related up zones. And so we know kind of where she stands on this density stuff. And so, yes, it's true that Councilmember Peterson and Juarez and Nelson, for the most part, kind of align ideologically. But I do think that Peterson is unique among all the council members, really, and that he is the most skeptical of increasing density in Seattle.
And it's important to point out, he was the one who called the question here. He is basically forcing the council to reconsider this and take a public vote on this to see where they stand. Just one last piece to wrap this up, David. I think it's interesting to look at this, too, because the mayor, in vetoing this, has been talking a lot about the budget. He's saying, he's asking all departments across the city to look at a 3 to 6% cut as we kind of get past the fiscal year here. He's looking at that, looking into the fall here with this $117 million budget deficit that we've heard so much about here. I think that was another piece of this, too, talking about a program that could cost him between $2 and $5 million, which isn't a ton in terms of what the city budget is all about at over $6 billion here. But when you're looking at any of these different pieces here and you're looking at the possibility of, okay, we're talking about some added costs here, what exactly are its aims and how exactly is it going to be paid for? I think the mayor was asking those questions, and people on the council were too.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized it well, and it's not. And when you have these kind of alliances of Councilmember Solon, for example, and Councilmember Peterson, you start to wonder, like, so what is the kind of shared goal here? And I think both of them have different goals with this. But yeah, I mean, this question of is the juice worth the squeeze on this one? I think is kind of clearly front and center.
All right. Well, thank you for that, David. Let's talk about this coming up. How's the Supreme Court ruling about how the EPA is going to do its job going forward? How is that really going to affect our state? We're going to discuss it on Now Hear This. Okay, so what part of your life isn't the Supreme Court involved in these days? We're taking a look this week on the decision that happened last week to limit the powers of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Here's what Governor Jay Inslee said about that.
This decision in the West Virginia case this morning essentially kneecapped the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to restrain pollution from these coal-fired plants. And this is a health danger that now we are exposed to and all Americans are exposed to.
David, I wanted to dive into this issue with you because I wanted to try to suss out how much of this is reality in terms of what the governor is saying here and how much of this turns into a political scare tactic, like they're going to start drilling on Mount Rainier or something like that. What did you draw out of how the governor reacted to this and how this is really going to affect our state when it comes to the issue of what happens for the EPA going forward?
So I mean, the ruling, as far as I understand, is, obviously environmentalists are really upset about it.
Of course.
But in the world of decisions that they were upset about, this one is narrower, as far as I understand.
Right.
It kind of regulates specifically power plant emissions. It doesn't touch the ability to regulate, tailpipe emissions, for example.
Right.
But, what it does do is it means that absent legislative action, which, as we know in Congress, is largely absent.
Ain't happening these days,
that the agencies and federal government are a lot more hamstrung in their ability to make decisions and quick decisions about emissions. And so I do think what this ruling does is put more pressure on individual states to take steps to regulate greenhouse emissions, because states are still able to legislate, and especially Washington State, there's no filibuster.
Right. Yeah,
the legislature can actually pass bills and delegate authority. So I think as far as what it means for Washington State, it just means that if you have an interest in curbing emissions, there might be more pressure to do so. I don't know how many. I mean, there are refineries. I don't know how many power plants are actually in Washington State that would be regulated by this. I mean, it's a pretty hydro forward state.
That's right.
So, like abortion, I don't know what the kind of one-to-one immediate impact is, but it is the Supreme Court. It involves federal regulation. So, of course, that does trickle down to every state. It just, how direct that is, I'm not sure.
Right. And climate change is one of those shared goal type of situations where I think a lot of states are banding together. A number of the Western governors, I know we saw this too last week, really trying to push together and say, here's what we need to do. So I guess it's going to be more the job of the states to rally other states. I just wanted to look at this, David, from another perspective here, because Senator John Braun, a Republican in the Senate, who's a very strong voice there, mentioned last week in kind of a battle of warring press releases with the governor here. He said that environmentalism and the whole concept of environmental policy is not a partisan issue. And I think that really is the case here in Washington State. I think back to the 70s when Warren G. Magnuson was out there in Puget Sound, paddling around and thinking, hey, we need to save the orca. And it turned into a bipartisan issue. Do you think that environmentalism is that type of partisan issue that splits people apart? I know we talk a lot about climate change or whatever else, but do you have a thought about that, about when that issue, at least at a national level, turned into something that was partisan? Because it really feels like that right now.
Yeah, it is very much that at the national level. I think in the Washington legislature, well, of course, you do have some of this. For the most part, Republicans in the legislature do believe that climate change is real.
Yeah.
And that is a thing that is happening. At least, certainly not the whole caucus, but enough of it that it probably makes up, between Democrats and the Republicans, it's, at least 75% of the legislature agrees on that. The question, though, on the flip side of that, when I was covering the transportation package, I heard a lot from Republicans who were sort of pillaring this package as basically a Trojan horse for Inslee's kind of quote green agenda. So while they do sort of support taking steps in theory to curb climate change, I do believe it's a real thing.
Right.
On questions of, say, highway construction or car traffic or things like that, which is the biggest source of climate emissions in the state.
Right.
I haven't seen, they did not support this transportation because they saw it as being too focused on sort of cutting climate change emissions and not focused enough on commerce and keeping the state moving and that sort of thing. And so, yes, I think in principle, certainly that there's more agreement around perhaps the need to address climate change in Washington State than there is at the federal level. But as far as what action, there's still a lot of disagreement. I mean, the Republicans didn't support the carbon trading system. They really hated that.
That's right. Well, voters in our state haven't liked a carbon tax a couple of times over the past few years.
In practice, what Inslee has pushed for and supported has basically gotten zero support from Republicans in the legislature as far as when it comes to his climate agenda. And so the talk might be a little nicer, but I'm not sure kind of what actual agreements Republicans and Democrats are coming to.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I think what Senator Braun is saying is, here we go, another scare tactic from the governor to whip up a lot of support for an environmental program that I think not that the different Republican lawmakers in our state are against those types of programs, but when you start whipping up this national fervor over it with the EPA, I wonder what comes out of it. So thank you for the back and forth on that. A really interesting piece of what's happening here locally as a result of what's happening from the U.S. Supreme Court nationally. I wanted to touch on one more issue that the City Council is talking about this week, We're talking about the City Hall Park land transfer to King County. Now, you might have remembered this over the past couple of years here. This is an issue. This is that park that is just to the south of the King County Courthouse. Had an encampment there, caused some issues. Some people from that encampment were getting into the courthouse. Eventually, the county said, we're shutting down that park there. Now, this is city land here, City Hall Park, but the county says, okay, we're actually going to take over that portion of the area here. We're going to take that from the city and offer the city some other land in a trade for that. And they have to do that in a way that it's roughly the same amount of land, and they have to do it in a way that happens over a certain amount of time. So this is something that County Council member Jeannie Cole Wells is going to be talking about with the council this week. And I know I gave a lot of background there, David, but I wanted to talk about this whole process of incorporating this park into the campus of King County. Do you have any idea what that's going to look like? And then bottom line for me, is it going to do the job of trying to keep people from camping in this area and being too close to the courthouse or whatever the county council members are trying to do here? Some thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly what it does is, I mean, we know that county employees and county officials and judges and council members have complained a lot about City Hall Park and kind of
people who are jurists too. I should point out, they're getting hassled and whatever else. Yeah, keep going.
In that, on that block. And so I think what it does is, turns over the authority to perhaps do something about that park to the county and to the people who say that they're the most affected.
Right.
As far as what it actually does, short of shutting down the whole park, which is certainly on the table, I suppose. And, it has been closed for long periods of time. At certain points. I think what it would really take is a lot of very concerted effort and outreach. And, there was some of that around that park and places for people to go because, it's been a place for a long time. I mean, it's right across the street from 3rd and Yesler there, which is, obviously has been a spot for a lot of, open air markets and things like that. So it's, the spot is what it is. And if they want to change the reality of it, they kind of have two options, which is to completely shut the park, which I don't know anyone wants that to be a permanent thing, or they, put a lot of time and energy and resources into, making change, helping the people that need help there and changing the dynamic of the park. It's it's a really complicated issue, but I think by doing this, the idea at least is that this gives the county kind of ability to do what they feel like they need to do in their own backyard.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I think about these different public places that get shut down and reopened. I'm thinking about Ballard Commons, for example. I'm thinking about Woodland Park, and those are City of Seattle projects. Now the county is trying to kind of dip its toe in the water here when it comes to this. And shutting down a park, that's one thing. And I get it. When you put up fences or whatever else, it's like, all right, we've done something. But that whole process of taking down those fences and what does that actually look like on the other side, I feel like that's a bit of an unknown. And I don't want to say, well, I'm just waiting for people to head back in there and start camping again. But I wonder how you do it. I mean, what is that magic? Because I haven't seen it from the city. I haven't seen it from the county over the past several decades when they do these different cleanups. And then what happens after that? That's the big question for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the big question for a lot of the city is you can kind of create these temporary solutions, but how long lasting and permanent is it, and who really benefits from it? And then, it has hairy questions too about who's allowed in public spaces. I mean, that's right. I mean, sure, you don't want sort of crime or whatever happening in parks, but people who are experiencing homelessness are also allowed to use city parks. It's not like these parks are just for office workers who are taking their lunch break. So you kind of get into this really hairy territory when you're trying to police the kinds of people you want in what are public spaces. I don't think that there's a simple answer to that.
No, absolutely not. And that's going to be something that the council is talking about this week. They're going to be talking about it over the next several months as well. Well, up next, who is our next Seattle Department of Transportation director? We're getting closer to an answer. We're going to talk about it on Transportation Talk. David, you tweeted something on this last week about Mayor Harrell having some candidates for the position of SDOT director, which has been in interim status for several months now. Do you have any more information on this, where this process is going to go? Some thoughts about this?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of information on this, except for that I heard from a few different sources who said that the search committee that's made up of, I can't remember exactly the number, but community representatives, vested interest in who is SDOT director, had conducted, somewhere, they got maybe somewhere around 70 applications, and they conducted, I don't remember, 7 or 8 pretty extensive interviews, and have forwarded on 8 finalists to Mayor Harrell to consider. He doesn't have to choose from those people. It seems likely that he would choose one person. I mean, he doesn't have the bandwidth to reconduct the search. But
right.
Who those people are, though, I still don't know, because the search committee members, I've asked a lot of them to tell me, have all signed NDAs, and so are not willing to spill the beans just yet. And then I checked in with the mayor's office. I had heard grumblings that we would hear an announcement as early as last week, but that seemed really fast to me. Checked in with them, the mayor's office, and they said probably in the next couple weeks. So it could be the end of this week, could be sometime next week, would be my guess. That itself would be pretty fast. I would imagine that the mayor would want to fly these people out and actually sit down and talk to them. But I mean, the takeaway from it is we had not heard very much about replacing the SDOT director, and now at least we know that there is some movement here and a sort of definitive timeline coming over the horizon.
That's good. And just some insight from my side of things, David. I was involved as the moderator of the OPA candidates who came through a few weeks ago. This was on the 8th of June. There was a public forum, as you'd say. I moderated this. It was aired live on Seattle Channel, so people were able to hear from these different candidates, and there were a number of questions that the mayor had gotten in, culled them down to a smaller level, and I asked those questions of all the candidates. So I'm imagining there might be another process like that going forward. He has talked about doing a similar thing with the chief of police candidates, who's also coming through, so that's another position to consider. But just to wrap up on this thought here, what kind of a job is this SDOT director jumping into, whoever it is? And I know there's a lot of different moving parts here, but I know this is something you're really connected to.
A big one, of course. There's a few kind of really big ticket items that this person will have to take on. First is the crafting of a kind of quote Seattle transportation plan, which won't specifically dictate much, but does kind of lay out the philosophy behind how Seattle's transportation system should be developed over the next few years. And, that has the potential to have, pretty big implications for balancing car traffic and transit and walkers and bikers and things like that, and safety. So that, this will be a big opportunity for that SDOT director to really lay out a philosophy for Seattle in this person's term, and then even, going forward. And then, the kind of, I would say the most tangible and specific thing that this person will have to do is decide how to move forward on the new transportation levy, because Move Seattle expires. The Move Seattle $930 million levy that was passed in 2015, I believe.
Biggest one in city history at the time,
Biggest one in city history, expires at the end of 2024.
Yes.
And that's a huge part of the Seattle Department of Transportation's budget and funds a lot of projects. And also, it has way under-delivered what it promised to voters. That was kind of one of Mayor Durkin's first moves, was to do this reset on this package. And so the question is, it's a thing that SDOT feels like they really need, but also can they kind of win trust back from voters? After it was said fairly explicitly that the thing they voted on was way too bloated and was never going to deliver on its promises. So that's going to be the most immediate and challenging thing facing this SDOT director.
Great insight there, David. I know Maiko Winkler-Chin, who just took over as the director of Office of Housing, that is something she is laser focused on, trying to get that housing levy passed next year. So there's a lot happening with these directors when it comes to those levy dollars there. I really appreciate the back and forth on that. All right, time to wrap up here. And David, I noticed something that you put out last week. I follow your Twitter assiduously. I didn't notice that already. You wrote that you've been living a lie when it comes to locally grown and dried beans. What's the story, man? Talk to me.
Well, my friend bought these beans from the farmer's market recently, and I think they were like $6 a pound, which is
okay. Were these magic beans where you plant them and like a beanstalk grows up in the sky, or no?
Right? Something way different. More than your average bean cost. But
yes,
cooked them, and I don't know that I've ever had beans that were that good. They were like no starchiness, no dryness, just smooth and buttery and with a lot of flavor. I don't know that I can go back to canned and bulk beans anymore. I'm going to be spending a lot more money on beans.
There we go. Bean party at David's, man. I can't wait. We're going to check that out. Hey, man, thank you as always for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, David. Thanks to everybody listening out there. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. The podcast is available on all of the major platforms. And once again, if you are a listener, please do support our show on Patreon. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching on Converge Media 2. We'll see you around.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.